Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight we're going to start out with David Canary, who died recently at the age of 77. You may never have known his name, but his face was extremely familiar on television. He was a longtime regular in the soap opera All My Children. He was a regular in Bonanza, playing Candy Kennedy, and was a frequent guest star in other TV series. In fact, he was a guest star in the two longest-running primetime dramas ever, Gunsmoke and Law and Order. He had a craggy, tough guy face. He was a football player in college, but that belied his real nature. He was never a big star in the movies, although he was in two of my favorite movies. In Roger Corman's St. Valentines Day Massacre, he plays one of the Gusenberg brothers along with George Segal. They get rubbed out in that Clark Street garage by Capone's henchmen at the end of the movie. And my favorite David Canary role is he plays Lamar Dean, one of Richard Boone's or Cicero Grimes' henchmen in Hombre. He's in one of the great scenes in movies, some great Elmore Leonard dialogue along with Paul Newman, when he and Richard Boone's men rob the stagecoach, and to make sure the passengers don't get away, they shoot their water bottles. But Paul Newman, who's at the top of the stagecoach, has a different idea, and he reminds David Canary of an earlier encounter they had in a bar called Delgado's, where David Canary was making fun of some Indians and Paul Newman disfigured his face. Just as David Canary recognizes Paul Newman shoots him.
Friend, I thank you for the buggy ride, and we'll do it again sometime. Kid? Get out. What? Just get out of here. Hey, Brady. Hold on a minute. I forgot a little something. What are you doing up there?
Getting my thing.
You figure you're going someplace?
Why stay here?
Just how far do you think you're going to get?
That's to find out.
How far did you say you're going to get? Give us some water! Tell how far.
How about as far as Delgado's?
What does that mean?
Maybe if we all get thirsty, we'll go to Delgado's and get some mezcal.
Great scene in a cool movie. One bit of David Canary trivia, he was a distant relative of Calamity Jane. We're going to move on now to Norman Pickering, who died recently at the age of 99. And Norman Pickering refined the record player after World War II and made it possible for people to listen to music easily in their homes, and thus expanded musical tastes. In the 1930s and 40s, there was a debate in the record industry as to whether a record stylus would read the grooves in a record up and down vertically or side to side laterally. The market finally decided that the groove should be read laterally, but that put a lot of pressure on the stylus and they had to be replaced frequently, and that in turn put a lot of stress on the shellac of the record itself. And that's where Norman Pickering comes in, and here he explains what he did.
The battle between vertical and lateral recording had been fought out in the 30s, and lateral had won. It's easier to build a good vertical pickup than a lateral pickup, but for many, many reasons, lateral disc recording won the battle. It was sort of like the beta VHS struggle with video. Now, the lateral pickups that had been made by RCA Victor and other companies, Static and whatnot, were rather massive. One of the key features that they had perpetuated was the replaceable phonograph needle. They had a little chuck and a screw, and you took this little sharp thing, stuck it in, and tightened the screw. Well, all of that stuff was massive, and the record had to provide the energy to move this thing back and forth. And what happened, of course, was that the shellac pressing material was not strong enough to do this very many times without breaking down and fracturing. So these pickups used to wear the records very rapidly. So I decided, first of all, to do away with the replaceable stylus and to use a jewel instead of a steel needle, to use a sapphire or hard material for the stylus, and to build a very, very lightweight, highly efficient magnetic structure that was about 1/10 the size of the traditional pickups. Although the signal level was lower, the improvement in electronics had made it possible to increase amplification without noise, so that solved that problem. The difference was really, it wasn't just a little, it was magnificent. Records would last longer and the high frequencies would be reproduced more accurately. Distortion was lower. It was the right thing at the right time, and I was lucky that I had it available.
We're going to move on now to our featured general, Sir Robert Ford, who died recently at the age of 91. He was the British general in charge of paratroopers fired on Catholic civil rights supporters in January 1972 in Northern Ireland in the infamous incident known as Bloody Sunday. Here are Matthew Bannister and Douglas Murray on BBC4's Last Word to discuss General Ford and the most notorious incident in the IRA uprising in Northern Ireland. Peril 1 are the British paratroopers that General Ford was in charge of, and the Savile Report was the report that investigated the incident.
General Sir Robert Ford was Commander Land Forces Northern Ireland at the time of the Bloody Sunday shootings in Londonderry in January 1972. It was one of the most controversial incidents in Northern Ireland's violent past. 13 people died after the parachute regiment opened fire on a civil rights march of some 10,000 people. The soldiers claimed they had been fired on first, but the Savile Inquiry, which took 12 years to report, absolved the victims of blame.
All factions in the Catholic community united against internment under the banner of civil rights.
Douglas Murray wrote a book called Bloody Sunday, Truth, Lies and the Savile Inquiry.
The situation was deteriorating by the day. Attacks from every side, on every side.
How long were you in Northern Ireland? 2 years. 2 years in Northern Ireland. Thoroughly enjoyed it because it was an operational setting which I liked. And Bloody Sunday happened at the beginning.
So where were you when Bloody Sunday took off? Were you in...
On Bloody Sunday, I was in Londonderry, watching it.
Tell us then about the events of Bloody Sunday. How did the day unfold?
On the 30th of January 1972, there was a demonstration due to take place in Derry, Londonderry. This was in a context where there had been serious unrest at similar protests between soldiers and demonstrators. The decision to deploy one para undoubtedly remains among the most controversial. A lot of the people in one para had very, very recently been fighting in combat situations and been training. Some had just come in from Cyprus, some had just come in from Aden. Using the 1st Battalion of the Parachute Regiment for what was likely to be a scoop-up and arrest operation is a very highly questionable judgment.
Questionable for what reason?
Because one para had a reputation for, by then, much more aggressive behaviour.
Do not fire back for the moment, unless you identify a positive target.
The audio recordings have General Ford at one of the barricades saying, "Go one para." Now, he certainly was not suggesting, he was not saying, "Go get them," as in shoot them. There was no evidence that's ever been uncovered that the senior figures in the army actually wanted what happened to happen. But nevertheless, he did urge them through the barricades. Of course, now we know from the Savile report definitively what happened as a result.
I understand that the troops had a yellow card with the rules of engagement written on it. What were those rules of engagement?
Well, they're highly specific.
Each and every soldier and policeman, of course, had to take responsibility for their own actions, and the famous yellow card laid out as to what their legal powers were to open fire or otherwise. In the end, it came to their decision. So it wasn't for General Ford or anybody else to say to Soldier X, shoot that man over there. That would not have been the case.
One of the interesting things is the de facto rationalisation to try to align with the yellow card what was clearly beyond what the yellow card allowed, i.e. to say that the person shot at X point was holding a nail bomb, for instance, and was in the act of throwing it at a soldier.
Which was not true.
Which was not true.
There was great confusion at the time, wasn't there? Because one para definitely opened fire and a number of people were killed. But immediately after those events, General Ford himself said that they had been fired on by the demonstrators.
Yes.
The official version is that 200 rounds were fired at your troops, yet local people say that you fired first. Can you be absolutely sure that the rounds were directed at your troops first?
Certainly. I can't specific about 200 rounds, but there was certainly in excess of 150 and probably something between 150 and 250. But there were a lot of rounds fired.
Among those local eyewitnesses who say that your men fired first and indiscriminately, there are priests, local priests and doctors. Would you say that they are lying?
I hesitate to call anyone liars, but the facts are we were fired at first.
They immediately got onto the television screens in order to make sure that it wasn't just the IRA story as they saw it that got out there, and were, of course, hoist on their own petard. However, it is the case that there was civilian firing on the army, but that it was not the firing which would in any way have justified the firing that one para did. And in actual fact, the firing that occurred and that killed people was in directions that were not the directions which provably were where some civilians did indeed fire from. And by civilians, really what I mean is official IRA.
Right. So when General Ford appeared on the TV and the radio in the immediate aftermath of Bloody Sunday and said that more than 150 rounds had been fired on his soldiers, he was mistaken, or was he telling a deliberate untruth?
I think he was mistaken. But in the immediate aftermath, General Ford went on the television and said what he thought had happened, and he was wrong, as is often happens after such an occasion. But that was, and understandably, held against him in the years afterwards.
What did the Savile Inquiry find about General Ford's involvement in all of this?
The inquiry did not criticise General Ford, but the reason why Ford played a role in the inquiry in particular was because of a memorandum that was unearthed after the inquiry was set up. There was a document discovered that was known as the Ford Memorandum. It was written only a few weeks before Bloody Sunday, and expressed some views about how to deal with what were known as the Derry young hooligans. He says, the gangs of tough teenage youths who've developed sophisticated tactics of brick and stone throwing, destruction and arson. He said a minimum force necessary to achieve a restoration of law and order would be to shoot selected ringleaders among the Derry young hooligans. Undoubtedly, the Ford Memorandum played a very large role in the post-2000 inquiry. Was it actually a smoking gun? In the end, it seems not. It's a proposal he had, a controversial proposal, which very clearly was not what was enacted on Bloody Sunday.
He was, however, ultimately responsible for these soldiers.
Yes.
Must he not be held culpable in some way?
I think it is very important, and the Savile Inquiry bears this out, to separate those things which people should be blamed for and those things which they cannot be blamed for. We now know we have a highly specific view of what happened from every imaginable direction, from thousands of witnesses. But the thing that will always linger over Ford's reputation, certainly, is that first mistake of deploying one power in the first place.
We're going to close tonight with Don Robertson, who died at the age of 92. I'm going to be candid with you. I missed his death earlier this year. He died earlier in 2015, but I just noticed he died, and he was one of my favorite country music songwriters. Even though he was born in Beijing, he was a good old boy. He wrote a lot of stuff for Elvis, but his best stuff wasn't written for Elvis. He wrote 3 classics for other artists. One of his classics was for Hank Locklin. I think we talked about Hank Locklin when we did the Kitty Wells podcast. This was a huge country hit in 1962, and it's a great song.
I'd like to introduce the first of our guest stars, Hank Locklin, singing one of his biggest hits. Please help me, I'm falling.
Please help me, I'm falling in love with you. Turn away from me, darling, I'm begging you to. Please help me, I'm falling in love with you.
Hey, I like that one. I'm going to play My Men, the Everly Brothers, covering that one.
Please help me, I'm falling in love with you. Turn away from me, darling, I'm begging you to. Please help me, I'm falling in love with you.
Now that's country music. Don Robertson also wrote my second favorite Eddy Arnold song. My favorite is Make the World Go Away. But Don Robertson wrote this one.
How many arms have held you and hated to let you go? How many, I wonder, but I really don't want to know.
I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. But the greatest Don Robertson song, in my opinion, was one he wrote for a nice Jewish boy from Canada, Leon Chaim Greene, a.k.a. Lorne Greene, a.k.a. Pa Cartwright. There you go. That's 2 Bonanza references in one show. At the height of the Beatles and the British invasion in 1964, Lorne Greene had an unlikely #1 hit, knocked all of them off the charts. With a song by Don Robertson. It was a song about a gunfighter who had the same last name as one of the Beatles' first names. Written by Don Robertson, it's cheesy but great.
They said my speed was next to none, but my lightning draw had just begun when I heard a blast that stung my wrist. The gun went flying from my fist, and I was looking down the bore of the deadly 44 of Ringo.
Ringo, Ringo.